Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Catel. Welcome to another episode of Basic Nigerian History. In our last episode, we discussed how the British slowly began solidifying their control over Nigeria as we know it up until 1914, when the amalgamation of Nigeria happened. This episode, we will discuss how Nigeria was ruled in the beginning of its colonial era and Frederick Lugard's influence on the area. Now, after establishing political control, Britain wanted to implement a system of taxation in order to force the indigenous Africans to shift from subsistence farming to wage labor. The Nigerians didn't want to do wage labor, but British needed them to do it in order to build their infrastructure for the export economy they were building. They were turning Nigeria into an export economy for the war. They paid the workers very little and the working conditions were terrible. As we know, forced labor was also used for the public projects. The British decided that the best way to control things would be through indirect rule. They believed this would fulfill the dual mandate of benefiting both the natives and the British. This way, they could justify their presence by saying they are providing progress, security, and modern civilization. Nigeria was administered by the colonial civil service. The British residents and district officers on one side, and the native leaders, emirs in the north, rulers in the southwest on the other side. The British side was responsible for operations in each region. The native administrators were responsible for the police, hospitals, public works, and local courts. The colonial civil service used native intermediaries for roles like diplomacy, propaganda, and espionage. Half of all taxes went to the colonial government, and the other half went to the native treasury. The local leaders couldn't spend as they wanted because the treasury used a planned budget for the payments of staff. There were also three distinct regional administrations of Nigeria: the north, the southwest, and the southeast, also known as north, west, and east, each with a British lieutenant governor to oversee them. They were ruled as three separate autonomous lands instead of one. In the north, the British took careful account of Islam and avoided posing any threats to the Islamic tradition. Lugard purposely forbade European activity on social services and wanted it to be done by the native rulers themselves. He barred missionaries, and the few limited efforts at education were harmonized with Islamic traditions and institutions. Only the leader, who was the emir or the sultan, approved the governor's legislation, and Hausa was still the official language. Basically, Lugard sheltered and protected the north from Western influence. To Lugard, the north was already perfect for their colonial ambitions of indirect rule. Their feudalistic way of rule and the strict, rigid order made it easy for the British to slip in as the new rulers. In the southwest, the British also tried to force indirect rule on the people, which meant reorganizing and reformulating traditional and political institutions. Christianity and Western education flowed effortlessly. In some parts, a mix of tradition and the new British way was achieved. In Lagos, traditional elites were involved in administration, but not as much as the governor who ruled directly there. Native councils were set up in other Yoruba lands as well, but the most prominent ruler was put at the head of each council. Local British officers acted as advisors to the native councils, letting them know what will please the colonial governments. Native councils approved the governor's legislation instead of one man like was done in the north, and English was the official language. Indirect rule struggled in the southeast hinterland because there were no political leaders, only figureheads. So they had to carry on with the warrant chief way of rule and the court system. They couldn't really do indirect rule. The economic link among the three regions increased, but there was no political interchanges. There was no pressure for greater unity. As mentioned before, Lugard preferred the north method of rule over the south. He himself would simply replace the caliph or the sultan, and the coffers were replaced by the British residents who were to be the watchful advisors. Out of all the natives, Lugard had high regard for the Emirates leaders, who were Fulani, maybe because of their fine features and fair complexion, or because he faced some of them in battle. No one truly knows why, but he thought they were remarkable. He has been on record saying they are born rulers and incomparably superior to the Negroid tribes in ability. He was also very contemptuous of the educated Lagos elite. He believed the ideal native was one with enough education to be useful, but not enough for him to think he is the equal of a white man. He wanted to move the capital of Nigeria from Lagos to Kaduna. Most of the commerce happened in the south, so therefore this is also where the bulk of the European education took place, as it was more useful here. It wasn't as needed or useful in the north. Also, it came with missionaries who weren't wanted in the north. And as I previously mentioned, Lugard and his successors limited missionaries on the ground of cultural preservation. Now, because Lugard didn't like what was going on in the south, he tried to establish what he had done in the north in the south as well, making emirs out of traditional rulers and chiefs and giving them authority they never had before, such as implementing tax. In 1914, Lugard started imposing direct taxation on the south, like was done in the north, by some of their powerful divine rulers. This happened in places like Oyo, Benin, and Abeokuta. The south was not happy at all with this. In July of 1914, ruler Aleke Ademola of Abeokuta appealed to the British for help to quell a popular uprising. Lugard agreed, but in return, he made him renounce any claim to independence that its previous treaty had granted. He also tried to drag Abeokuta into the taxation. The uprising eventually ended in the massacre of 500 protesters by government troops. In 1915, Lugard imposed direct taxation on Abeokuta again. The Egba rebelled and created carnage. They sacked houses, they burnt government buildings, uprooted rail tracks, killed Europeans. Lugard refused to believe that taxation wasn't going to work in the south the same way it worked in the north. Yes, he blamed Lagos and the ex-governor MacGregor's soft hand. Lugard replied by sending 1,000 British and native troops armed with the latest weapons developed. And during the way, they carried out a terrible massacre, opening fire for hours on the people of Ijemo. It was to be the revenge for the murder of an European and to send a message to all others. It became known as the Ijemo massacre. Public outcry led to a colonial office inquiry. They questioned if Lugard was losing control and why he was trying to impose foreign taxation on the west side of Nigeria when such a method obviously wasn't suited to their way of living, unlike the north. A formal inquiry into the Ijemo massacre began, but it was suppressed by Lugard because obviously he was the governor of Nigeria at that time. He wasn't going to let anybody know what he did. In 1916, Lugard formed the Nigerian Council, which had 6 traditional leaders: Emir of Kano, Sultan of Sokoto, King of Benin, blah 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 blah. They were supposed to be the voice for their peoples, but in reality, he only used the sessions to inform them of any new British policy so they could tell their people. So it's just basically, I'm telling you guys what to say, go and tell your people this is what we want. In 1916, Lugard imposed direct taxation on Oyo, and obviously, the Oyo people reacted by rioting. Riots was everywhere. They were like, we're not paying tax. For the East, Lugard couldn't do the same thing. So he carried on the legacy of Rowan chiefs, creating chiefs and local rulers where there had been none before. The British residents would tell the native ruler what to do, and then he would then tell his people. The court was crucial in this. Lugard was also opposed to English justice being offered to the native. So the native were only allowed to get their justice from native courts. On December 10th, 1916, Walter Long was appointed as a new Secretary of State. He didn't appreciate the arrangement Harcourt had given Lugard, allowing him to continue to act as a governor for 6 months in a year from London without even putting an acting governor in place. So in 1918, Walter Long got rid of that stupid idea and sent Lugard his new appointment orders. No more ruling from 6 months from London and then 6 months in Nigeria. Lugard sent a letter in protest, and the colonial office treated this letter as a resignation. I personally think they were just getting fed up with Lugard and maybe a bit concerned that he was getting too big-headed, getting special treatment, massacring natives left, right and center, doing as he pleased, willy-nilly. Lugard tried to recall his letter and said he didn't intend to resign, but it was too late. And in 1990, approximately in May, Hugh Clifford was chosen by the colonial office to replace Lugard. He was to help reduce the anti-government feelings Lugard had been creating in Nigeria. And that's it for this episode. Just a quick recap of what we learned. We learned how Nigeria was being ruled after it became one solidified way, and we learned all the craziness that Lugard was doing, trying to impose tax on the south the same way he did in the north, and the way he was massacring people in the southwest with the Jemu massacre, with the riots that happened in Oyo, and all kinds of different things. Stay tuned for the next episode where we're going to talk more about Nigeria during World War I and what Clifford did to help Nigeria. Much love. Dr. Catel out.